pray that this sound would go before your throne and it would give you pleasure. We just lift also all of our hearts before you, Lord. Change the parts that need to be changed. And Lord, just inhabit the praise of your people. In Jesus' name. Sikoryak. Come on up, Terry.
Morning.
Good morning.
Mark and I go way back to the 80s, where I was doing youth group. Anybody remember Mystic Island Baptist Church? Pastor Rich Newrod. I did the youth group, and one day this guy pulls up in a yellow Jeep, What's going on? And then he came to my house with a Harley, with a bandana, and my kids were like, "That's a church guy?" I said, "Yeah." He said, and we played together in groups, and he's been on my radio show, so Mark's a great guy. My name is Sikoryak. Glad to be back here this morning. I run a ministry called This One Voice. We minister to people who are survivors of dysfunctional or abusive homes. I also do a radio show that I've been doing for 25 years called This One Voice. So good to be back here this morning. Buckminster Fuller once wrote that there is nothing about a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. Caterpillars are slow, and they're slimy, they're ugly. Although some caterpillars do have kind of cool coats, right? Some have pretty cool colors. But for the most part, we look at caterpillars as just creepy, leaf-eating pests. I mean, nobody's happy to see a caterpillar on it, right? I mean, whoa, you're always blinking off. But if a butterfly lands, oh, that's something different than magic. But a caterpillar is just a transitional form to a butterfly, or a monarch, or even a rainbow butterfly, some of the most beautiful butterflies. And the caterpillar is one of God's greatest illustrations of hidden potential. Just like David, right? I mean, there's nothing about a shepherd that tells you he's going to be a king. And the only thing that stands between a caterpillar and a butterfly is a cocoon. Now, the cocoon is amazing, isn't it? I mean, it provides protection and camouflage. It's a place of transformation and creation where an ugly caterpillar emerges as a butterfly. Some cocoons produce butterflies, and some cocoons produce dragons. You see, there's nothing about a young child that tells us it's going to be a dragon. See, children are happy, they're trusting, they're full of life, they smile, all they want is attachment. But children are just intermediate forms of adults. And some adults are dragons. Now, not the kind of dragons that fly around and burn up villages and eat your livestock, but the kind of dragons that consume their own lives and sabotage the lives of those around them. The only thing that stands between a child and a dragon is the cocoon. And some cocoons are toxic. You see, if you grew up in Chernobyl, you don't know what Chernobyl is. Chernobyl was the greatest nuclear accident in history out of Russia. And if you grew up in Chernobyl, you are radioactive. And you are leaking on those around you. A guy says, well, I grew up in Chernobyl, I'm not radioactive. They're like, dude, when we turn the lights off, you glow. I mean, you are radioactive. So what does a toxic cocoon look like? According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, studies on adverse childhood experience, the statistics are staggering. 1 in 5 American girls under the age of 18 have been sexually molested. 1 in 12 boys. Now, that number seems like almost unreal, right? It can't be right. Those were only the cases that are reported. And I thought that was a little bit out of whack, just too high, until I found out a number of years ago that my own mother was sexually molested by her father in the 1930s. That sort of abuse causes severe damage in the body, soul, and spirit, and it echoes for generations. 1 in 4 American children have been beaten to the point of marks being visible. That's not discipline. That's abuse. See, we're not called to shame our children. We're called to shepherd them. Now, some people will say, spare the rod, spoil the child. But see, the shepherd has a rod and a staff, not to beat the sheep, but to direct them, to correct them, and to protect them. Suppose you hired me as your shepherd, and I took your sheep out, and they come back, their legs are broken, their eyes are hanging out, they're all bloody and beaten, and it's only half of them. The other half, and you say, well, what happened to my sheep? I don't know, they got a little out of hand, I had to hit them. I had to discipline, spare the rod, spoil the sheep. You wouldn't pay me. You'd probably hang me. In Psalms 23, it says, thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Sounds weird, doesn't it? If you're using the rod and the staff to beat. But see, there's safety and comfort in God's godly discipline, because it's delivered with consistency and compassion. That's what we're called to do as parents. 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence, usually witnessed by their children. 1/4 of us in America have been raised by alcoholic or addicted caregivers. Now, my home growing up was never safe, it was never calm, it was often chaotic, unpredictable, and loud. We lived in a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. And let me explain to you what that is. That's a reaction in the limbic system in the brain. And suppose I want you to suppose you're walking in the woods. You're on a nice walk in the woods, and all of a sudden you come upon an aggressive bear. Your survival response kicks in to fight, flight, or freeze. And what happens in that state, the physical effects of that state, are the heart beats faster and harder. The bladder relaxes, pupils dilate, you get what's called tunnel vision. You breathe rapidly and shallow. Your blood pressure increases. Production of tears and saliva decrease. You get what's called cotton mouth. Your hearing diminishes. You get tunnel vision. Muscles tense. Blood decreases to hands and feet. You get cold feet. Blood sugar spikes. Executive part of our brain shuts down. So when your prefrontal cortex shuts down, you can't reason. You just react. Your immune system shuts down. But once you're away from the bear, calm down and return to what's called homeostasis. But I want you to imagine that the bear comes home every night and you marinate in this anxiety. Every day for years, wallowing in stress hormones. Just this toxic cocktail destroying your immune system. You know, the Bible says that anxiety in the heart of a person weighs them down. And that is so true. Because how far down? If you read what years of stress will do to you, it's scary. 1 in 8 American children have witnessed their mother abused, either physically, verbally, or through abandonment. Now, if any of that describes the home you grew up in, first of all, I want to congratulate you because you survived. Pat yourself on the back because you survived. Because you know what? Everybody doesn't make it. My brother, who grew up in the same home as me, didn't make it. And he died by suicide. Second, if that describes the home you grew up in, here's the truth. It's going to manifest. It's going to manifest in the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. It's going to manifest in our marriages, in how we treat our children, how we resolve conflicts, and how we experience God. I always looked at God as good for everybody else, but judging to me, disapproved of me, which was my father, greatest guy to everybody. Mark knew, my dad, greatest guy to everybody, but to me, unapproving, shaming. Solomon says in Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart with all diligence, with all of your might, for from it flows the spring of life. But if that spring is foul, what do you think you're going to grow? See, our subconscious mind, which is formed in childhood, has tremendous power in our day-to-day reality. And in our childhoods, we develop 4 basic modes of thinking that sabotage our lives. If you grew up in a toxic cocoon, those 4 modes are perfection, control, all or nothing thinking, or critical inner parent. So let's see if you recognize any of these, or in the person sitting next to you, right? Or the person you live with. Because most people say, I recognize that. That's my wife. I say, dude, that's you! Oh, well, a little bit, but it's mostly her. These modes of thinking become so powerful that we become neurochemically addicted to them. And because we become addicted to dysfunction, we become magnets for chaos. And so we become addicted to the chaos and dysfunction that our thinking creates. And it takes tremendous trust in God. This is what our ministry does. That significant breakthroughs in your life are always preceded with courageous breaks with the past. So first of all, perfectionism. So perfectionism is, if I can be perfect, my mom will love me. If I can be perfect, my dad will stop drinking. If I can be perfect, mom and dad will get back together. Now, you all know this perfectionism. Some of you have heard it. You know, my dad, if he'd come home with a 98, what would he say? How come you didn't get 100? Not good job. This, of course, is a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Because nobody's perfect. There are no perfect marriages. There are no perfect children. There are no perfect people. And people who live with this mode of thinking are not able to distinguish between making a mistake and being a mistake. In 1956, maybe some of you remember this, in the World Series, Don Larson pitched a perfect game. That means nobody got on base. There were no hits, there were no errors, there were no walks. Nobody got on base. 27 people up, 27 people down. But the game wasn't perfect. It took him nearly 100 pitches to finish the game. A perfect game would have been 27 pitches, right? 27 up, 27 down. Or maybe 81 pitches, all strikes. But his game wasn't perfect. And some people will argue to this day, there's a guy in North Jersey, I don't even know if he's alive still, he would argue it wasn't a perfect game. A lot of those strikes were balls. It's like, dude, it's 60 years ago. You just give it up. It's a perfect game. But see, God's not looking for perfect people. Look at Jesus' disciples. He handpicked these people. They weren't perfect, were they? They were knuckleheads. In Romans 3:8 it says, but God demonstrates his own love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It doesn't say when we became perfect, God chose us. While we were yet sinners, remember that. While we were yet sinners, while we were imperfect, living in sin, God chose us. And I didn't sign up for perfect either. I didn't want to be perfect. But here's a mercy in this, that God shines greatest in our imperfection. There's a Japanese bowl art called kintsugi art. And they take a bowl that's cracked, that's imperfect, and they fill the cracks with gold. And those bowls that are filled with gold, that are fixed with gold, they become the most valuable. Because the Japanese look at it and say, in the place where the bowl is broken, it shines the brightest. In the places where we're broken, God helps us to shine the brightest. There's a great song by Peter Mayer called Japanese Bowl. And he says, I'm like one of those Japanese bowls. I have some cracks in me, but I shine the brightest where I'm broken. You know, he says to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, because in your weakness, my power is perfected. The next mode of thinking is control. The grid of control is amazing, right? If I can control you, you won't abandon me. If I can control my circumstances and the way you see me, I can still look good. I mean, we control people by playing the victim. We control people by playing the martyr. We control people by being the enabler. We control people with anger, with guilt. People tried to control Jesus with flattery. And religion, look, religion is an amazing way to control people. You can control people with silence. Have you ever gotten the silent treatment? I mean, it's powerful, isn't it? What did I do? You're not talking to me. What did I do? And look, I've suffered from that, and I've done it too. My father was great with the silent treatment. He wouldn't talk to my mom for a long time. My neighbor, her husband, wouldn't talk to her for years. It was so weird going in their house. When I told my children, is we can't control the circumstances of our lives ever. We can react, or we can direct. Many of us have reacted all of our lives, and that's worked out great, hasn't it? But we can direct too. You know, Jesus is crucified between two thieves. One of them reacts. He says, why don't you come down from that cross and save yourself and save us? Why don't you do the right thing if you're God Almighty? He's reacting to his situation. And you want to say to this guy, I want to say to this guy, listen, that attitude got you where you are today. On a cross, dying. Maybe you want to shift it. If you can shift it just a little bit, things will change. Because the second thief shifts his thinking, doesn't he? Instead of reacting, he directs. He takes responsibility for his consequences, and he says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, today, you'll be with me in paradise. Just by that shift of attitude, just by that from reacting to directing, that a convicted thief accompanies Jesus into heaven. It's extraordinary. Just a little shift in our thinking. Controlling behavior is rooted in fear. I'm afraid you're going to leave me, so I have to control you. But we can't control what happens. We can't. But we can control how we interpret it. In our ministry, This One Voice, we talk about flipping the preposition from to to for. That things don't happen to me, they happen for me. All things work together for the good of those who love God. But all things aren't good, are they? Some things are terrible. And I don't know why I grew up the way I did. I had no control over who my dad was going to be. I don't know why I grew up that way. Matter of fact, I grew up thinking God had forgotten us and abandoned us. It distorted the way I felt about myself. But now I realize God did it for me because of the ministry that I run. Don't miss the lesson. You've already paid the tuition. God doesn't do things to us. He does things for us. It's not always clear. But because of that history, This One Voice, the ministry was born. And through that ministry, people was blessing people. You know, the pandemic, it's weird, because God didn't do it to us. We met in a building in Ocean City. And we would have, between 12 or 20 people, usually, 10, 20 people every week. And then the pandemic came, we couldn't meet anymore. So we did the meeting by Zoom. Well, now we have people in California, we have people in Canada, we have people in Southeast Asia. It has exploded. I run an international ministry now. I mean, it's kind of cool. And I don't want to go back. So it didn't happen to us, it happened for us. And I get to influence my children through this ministry, and my grandchildren, and their children, and their children. I get to influence them, not to control them. And I always ask myself, what area in my life do I feel a need to control? And am I willing to let it go? The next mode of thinking is all or nothing thinking. Now, this is my favorite because it's me. when I read about this all or nothing thinking, I realized this is me, and this is really annoying. I must have really annoyed people. But if you grow up with no boundaries, you're never safe. And so you build these boundaries around yourself with the way you think to protect yourself. I can control that. I believed what I believed. I thought the way I thought. It was researched. It was reinforced. It was impenetrable. It was ironclad, and you're not getting in unless you agree. There's a vast difference between being decisive and closed-minded. In Proverbs 18, King Solomon says, "A fool does not delight in understanding, but only in revealing his own mind." All or nothing thinking is different than being decisive. In all or nothing thinking, I really don't consider other opinions if it's different than mine. I have a friend who says, if you disagree with me, you're my enemy. That's a little too far. I mean, I never went that far. But in all or nothing thinking, we don't consider other opinions. It's the tyranny of either or. And we see it all, we see it in our present political situation, doesn't it? Either you agree with me on everything, or you're a tyrant, or you're a traitor, or you're a Nazi. Either you think my way, or you're out. Either you believe exactly the way I believe, or you're going to hell. It was the same thing with the religious leaders of Jesus' day. Either you condemn the marginalized, either you condemn the sinners, or you're a friend to sinners. Really? Wow. That's amazing. But the question I had to ask myself is, how many times did I try to prove that I was right, where it just didn't even matter? I mean, have you ever gotten into arguments and then you're down the road and you're like, well, I got to keep arguing because I've already started this, but this is the wrong road. I just don't want to be down this road. So instead of either and or, suppose we consider and. I can have an opinion, and so could you. Our opinions could be different. Mine is right, but you're free to be wrong. But see, the world opens up to us when we consider other perspectives, right? Doesn't it? People feel valued in your presence. Everybody doesn't have to think the way I do. They should, but they don't have to. The last is the critical inner parent. And we all know this, right? We all have this voice in our head. It's the voice that berates us and undermines us at every turn. It doubts us. It sabotages our success. It's a form of self-abandonment. You're not fast enough. You're not good enough for that. You don't deserve that. You can't do that. You know, a couple of years ago, my wife and I saw Russ Taff. You all remember Russ Taff? Russ Taff was an amazing gospel singer in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, this guy was handsome. Really handsome. And he had a great voice, and he just had the whole groove. And he won a Grammy for gospel singing. And 5 minutes after he won a Grammy, he said, "You're a fraud. You're a phony. You don't deserve this." The voice of his father. And he ended up an alcoholic and a drug addict. Nobody knew. I didn't know. I followed him. I thought he was like the coolest thing. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with him. It was just the voice in his head from his abusive father that just kept saying, "You're no good. You don't deserve this. You're a phony. You're a fraud." When I was in 6th grade, anybody remember the Monkees show? Hey, hey, with the Monkees. People see your monkey around. I can sing the whole song for you if you'd like. But the Monkees had these shirts. They had these double-breasted shirts. Remember the monkey shirts, the double-breasted shirts. I mean, they were cool. And my mother bought me a paisley monkey shirt. So I was like double cool. I am like really kicking it. And all day long, people saying, "Oh, Terrence, man, that shirt is awesome. Yeah, my mom bought it for me. Yeah, it's monkey shirt, you know. It was so cool. I was like a star that whole day. Walking home from school in 6th grade, a little voice in my head said, "What are you doing wearing that shirt? You don't deserve to wear that shirt. You don't deserve anything nice." I took the shirt off on my way home, and I threw it in my neighbor's garbage, and I never wore it again. Because of that little voice that said, "You don't deserve it." Because of this line of thinking, the critical inner parent, we're unable to distinguish between an observation and a value judgment. I'll give you an example. When I do the wash, I just put everything in. I mean, everything goes in, gets washed. If the colors fade or something, I throw it out. Or wear it like that. I mean, it's just, that's how I do my wife will say, "Don't mix colors with the whites." I mean, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, that's just, hey, don't mix the colors with the whites. Now, that's just an observation on how to do the wash. But what I would hear is, "You're so stupid you can't even do the wash. Can't you even do wash, man? Nobody's going to love you. You can't do wash." Now that's a leap. But that's where my mind went to. In 1 John 3:20, he says, "We rest assured that whenever our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything." See, in the ministry, this one voice, we want to replace that critical inner voice with the voice of Christ. In John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery is brought to Jesus, and the religious community is condemning her. They're ready to stone her. I mean, they are shaming her. First of all, it's kind of crazy because they only bring the woman. We caught her in the very act of adultery. It's usually not a solo act, but they only bring the woman. And then what does Jesus say? "Okay, all right, we'll stone her. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." And they all begin to leave. And it says the oldest voice is leaving first. And then she's just left with one voice, the voice of Christ, who says, "I don't condemn you. And there's a better way for you to live." See, these modes of thinking are easy to see in others, right? I mean, I'm telling you right now, you're thinking of somebody, oh yeah, John's an old enough thinker, I know it. You're thinking of somebody right now. As a matter of fact, I gave this book to my friend, and we use a red book, and I gave him, and I asked him to read the section, and he said, "Oh, that's my wife. My wife is all over this." I said, "Dude, I didn't give it to you for her. It's for you." And some of it's me, but most of it's her. A butterfly can't decide it doesn't like the way it turned out. Can't go back into the cocoon and change. But dragons can. It's a lot of work, and you have to want to change. And some people say, "Well, look, hey, you know what? I am the way I am, and that's the way it is. Take it or leave it." And I'm like, that's like the greatest statement in the world. I'm not willing to change, and I'm just willing to stay a jerk. But Pete Scazzaro, in his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he says one of the symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality is denying the past's impact on the present. Childhood messages become our path. But we don't have to remain on that path. The greatest influence on what we are going to grow in our lives is not going to be the circumstances, but rather how we think about those circumstances. Because the way we think is the wellspring of our lives. Solomon says, "The wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deceptions, giving thoughts to our ways." See, we see things not as they are, but as we are. Deliverance is not freedom. Deliverance prepares us for freedom. God has prepared us for something greater. He delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, but that generation doesn't enter the promised land, do they? No, because they still had the Egyptian slave mentality. Miles Monroe, in his book, The Burden of Freedom, says, without mental transformation, the actions we take to change may produce a new place where we continue to do our old things. One of the things I say to people in our ministry is, listen, you can change your hair, you can change your wardrobe, change your job, you can change where you work, you can change your face, you can get plastic surgery, you can buy a new hat, get a car and drive to Cleveland. But with this new red hat, you're just a jerk in Cleveland with a red hat, because you know what? Nothing's changed. You're doing the same things in a new place. We teach people how to break the chains of the past. Remember, in Proverbs 12:25, it says, anxiety in the heart of a man weighs him down. But the second half is what? But a good word makes it glad. And what's the good word? Look, I can't change my ancestors. You know, there's been dysfunction in my family that's been handed down from generation to generation. This bag of rocks that's weighing people down. I can't change my ancestors, but I can influence my descendants. When I was baptized in the summer of 1978 in a guy's pool in Los Angeles, Mr. King baptized me in his pool, and he said to me, and this was kind of weird what he said to me, he said, Terrence, you just changed your family tree. Because you've introduced eternity into your family where it wasn't a month ago. I didn't really understand that. I was single when I was 22, and 2 weeks before I was smoking pot and running around Los Angeles. I mean, I didn't understand changing my family tree. But man, how true that was. In his book, The Infinite Game, Simon Sinek distinguishes between finite and infinite games. So it's things like football, baseball, they're finite games, they finish. But I'm in an infinite game. It doesn't end when my casket closes. The dysfunction of my grandfather didn't end when we buried him. It continued on his sons and to the next generation. My influence goes on for generations. There's a great song by Sarah Groves. She's a gospel singer. It's called Generations. And she will say, generations will reap what I sow. You know, American Indian has a saying, whenever you make a decision, consider the seventh generation. I like that. I consider the generations after me, and that is a good word. Now, from one of my favorite songs, Augustine's Lament, the words are, it's the fear of moving forward. It's the fear of looking back. It's the fear that we might go unnoticed and slip between the cracks. It's the fear of contradiction. It's the fear of losing face. It's the fear of fear itself. It's the burden of our race. My soul is restless. My soul is restless. My soul is restless till I find rest in you. The message of this one voice is the same message that Jesus gave to the woman caught in adultery. That you are not condemned by God. That there's a better way to live. And that's the crux of our ministry. We have brochures on the ministry outside. We do a Zoom call. So you can attend the Zoom call if you want to, or invite friends to attend the Zoom call. I want to thank you for inviting me here this morning. And seeing Mark again, it's always a great. And seeing Jane again, it's great. Jane used to cut my hair. In the days when I looked better. So, thanks a lot. God bless you.
Thank you.
Once again, Terry, great job. You can stand, you guys. in my house. We'll spend our lives on you today. Wonderful Counselor, everlasting Father, eternal King, Lord of hosts, building we follow. Today I choose to follow you. Today I choose to give my yes to you. Today I choose to hear your voice and live. Today I choose to follow you. Today I choose to follow you. Today I choose to follow you. Have a wonderful week, folks. Terry, thank you so much for the inspiring message. Always get something out of something. I like to record his stuff because I got to listen to it after over and over again. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful week. Enjoy yourself.